Hello, I'm Deidre McIntyre, and I'm founder of Black People in Cryptocurrency, and I'm glad to be at Black Blockchain Summit for this wonderful fireside chat that we have planned for you today. It's called Disrupting Self-Hate, Racism, and Tribalism Through Blockchain Technology. And I'm joined with Dr. Kevin Washington, also known as Dr. Mawada Kyrie, and we're going to get right into it. I mean, Dr. Mawata and I we chatted a little bit, but I was intrigued by his long bio and his long extensive. So I want to get into the meat of what his background is, his connection to our home base, which is Howard University as well, and all of his experiences in terms of dealing with the mind. So Dr. Mawada, tell us something about yourself.
Well, it's a pleasure to be here to have this discussion about blockchain technology and to be with you, Sister Deidre McIntyre, this process of unfolding and unpacking something that is definitely transforming our community globally. And so we need to be able to be ahead of the curve when technology like this comes up. We need to also be able to be in the mix, right? Facilitating this growth and development, and more importantly, influencing how it impacts positively our community so that we can continue to build and to become stronger. As you mentioned, Howard University is where I first became associated with blockchain. As I was leaving campus teaching a class, one day I saw this group of individuals that was so energized about blockchain. And I've been speaking with someone at a local coffee shop, I will not call its name at this time, but we were having a conversation about blockchain technology and the white papers. And so he was convincing me about this process, and I was asking him, what is he? So let me show you. So we had been in communication about this same construct. And then all of a sudden I passed by and I see this conference probably about a month or two later. And then I knew that I was on the right path. The right path was to begin to ask critical questions. What is this? And what's happening with it? And how does it work out? And then I think I met Sinclair and some others in this space. And we began to have a greater conversation about what does it mean for Africa. So my thrust in psychology is that I am a counseling psychologist, and I was teaching counseling psychology and doctoral students at Howard University at that time. I look at the dynamics of cultural trauma for people of African descent. So I talk about persistent enslavement, systemic trauma, which is this idea of persistent as ongoing enslavement, the ideology of enslavement that incarcerates a population, systemic, it runs through every aspect of their lives, and the trauma that has been incurred from what's called the ma'afa, or some call the slave trade. And we can unpack that a little bit more. But the reality of this conversation, how it ties in, is that we cannot have a post-traumatic moment when we're not beyond the trauma. So when we see issues of a pillage of a community, the idea of economic deprivation in communities, we see dynamics that's happened in the United States with the knee on the neck of George Floyd, the intrusion of Breonna Taylor, the raid or the enslavement or rally process of Ahmaud Arbery, or even see an individual being corralled at his home or leaving a home. When you talk about Jacob Blake, we don't have a post-trauma moment, that we are re-experiencing the dynamics of trauma every single day, and it's tied to enslavement ideology, which suggests that that which is European is greater than all others, and that that which is not European is inferior. And the greatest threat to European ideology, European well-being, European wellness, and this some will call white, the greatest threat is African. If you don't understand that way, think about the various games. Dr. Francis Cress Wilson has given us a wealth of knowledge. And I'll just give you one example of the game of billiards, and the ultimate clash on the billiard table is between the black ball and the white ball. And so we see this played out over and over again. So they psychologically reinforce themselves with this idea of inferiority, superiority conversation of black and white. And so we look at ways to crash that, challenge that, to begin to heal from the trauma that causes in a people that begin to internalize that entire process. And so that leads us to Black self-hatred. But that's who I am. And currently I am the head of sociology and psychology department at Grambling State University. My alma mater where I went to, did my undergraduate. My parents met there. So my entire life has been at Grambling. And I'm excited about the opportunity to be able to share in the experience of facilitating the growth and development of a place that has meant so much for me in my life. And also I am the founder and CEO of NSAPO Empowerment Works, which is a counselor psychological services organization. And so we engage in individual counseling, psychotherapy, as well as consultation to organizations and groups. And I'm also, a speaker, and Wata Speaks is why Wata works out. And then I do a whole speaking piece on Speak Black to Me. And this ties into the Speak Black to Me discourse.
Okay, so the general, or what I like to say is the 10-year-old explanation of what blockchain is this identification, applying a alphanumeric identification like a school ID or a social security number for people who know numeric identity, license plate number. Now, blockchain has its own numeric system. You're placing an ID on either physical property that you've tethered to this ID or digital property that you've tethered to this ID. And once you have it, at some point, you can exchange it in some fashion, whether you're selling it or airing it or gifting it, or you accidentally sent it to the wrong person and it goes to some other type of possession. And so my question is, in relationship to PEST, post-enslavement stress trauma, if I have that correctly, do you think we of Black people, because of this experience, have lost the concept of ownership of anything? And if so, how do we regain that as compared to how the European thinks of property or asset?
Oh, that's really good. So when we talk about persistent enslavement, systemic trauma, the S is systemic as it runs through everything. That's important because even in the economic system, there is this idea of inferiority and superiority. If you begin to look at the African existence, we've perpetually existed as property in the context of the European worldview. So we're simply a commodity that is bought and traded for the advancement of the population. If you begin to examine directly the enslavement experience in America, or the exporting through human trafficking from the continent of Africa, it was the loss of personhood and being used as commodity for wealth building of a population. And so this same ideology is present today. If you look at the conversation that was had as we are in this moment of 2020, when the basketball players made a decision not to play. And that was a decision made to not to play, to perform, because there's an understanding that what they mean to economic growth and development of a population, they wanted to be able to disrupt that. The challenge is that when the individuals don't own themselves. And so that is the nature of the conversation that we have globally, that when we are not in ownership, whether it is in education, whether it is in health, in law, in politics, when we are not in ownership of ourselves, of the things that make us who we are perpetually used as a commodity for someone else. So the prison industrial complex, and I'll wrap it into your question. The prison industrial complex operates by virtue of having a labor force. The 13th Amendment says that slavery is to be abolished with the exception of those found guilty of a crime. And so I can find you guilty of any crime, and therefore my economics is further impacted or enhanced if I'm a part of the controlling group, because the person that is in is not a person, but simply a product. When we talk about, again, healthcare and these things. So you asked the question, blockchain construct, how can it be utilized, or can we think about it being a part of who we are at wealth building and product development? It is difficult to do that when we don't see ourselves as being owners of reality, that we always see ourselves as being simply a commodity that is bought and traded in the context of building wealth for someone else. And simply we want the trickle down process. And it becomes comfortable to receive that because it's what we become used to. I'll give you a classic example of in Senegal, for example, there was a conversation had about rice. And we know that what rice rice look almost like couscous slash grits, and not the grain. So then they say, well, we'll grow our own rice and then we will sell the rice. Well, the problem was that the people would not buy the rice in the grain form because they've been conditioned to see rice as being a small couscous slash grit product rather than being a long grain. But the point is that once we've become conditioned to see ourselves as commodity, it becomes a challenge to be able to transcend that, to be able to see how one can be the owner. And what I'm seeing with blockchain and the concept about selling in this process and buying and building is about ownership of data, content, information, which then leads to ownership of greater goods to be able to build. And that's a challenge for us because we are used to being commodity rather than being owners.
Yeah, I see that a lot. I have a group on Facebook, Black People in Cryptocurrency, and there's about 10,000 people in the group. But as with any large group, you just see the same, like 30 or 40 people talking a lot of times. And one of the biggest debates that we had was one time when I posted that, I see a tremendous amount of postings that either celebrate or encourage people to on-ramp on white-led startups, but I don't see the same of the Black startup founders that are in the group, including, if I'm posting, and I'm curious as to, how do we change that mentality? Because in my opinion, correct me if I'm wrong, I don't think any Black-led startups are going to survive or thrive without Black investors realizing that they need to turn to Black startup founders and invest in them, or without Black consumerism or support. So I'm very curious as to, how do we, wrap our minds around breaking this pest chain, so to speak, because I've seen it. I used to be a public school teacher in Brooklyn. And it's where you would expect it in Brooklyn, Cypress Hills, among, so-called working class families, Black families, a lot of Black immigrant families from the Caribbean and from Spanish speaking Caribbean, but they're still in school, is still 90% Black. So in a way you almost expect to see it because you're dealing with a juvenile population. But in turn, I've also seen it among MBA holders in corporate America, that if you suggest that a startup is Black-led and that startup founder may want to hire disproportionately other Black people, the first questions that arise are, well, you should hire the best people, as if to imply that in a certain effort to have a browner company, it doesn't necessarily have to be 100%, even if you're shooting at 50%, is somehow an inferior company because of that notion. So how do we go about, remapping the minds that are affecting, across socioeconomic backgrounds, this idea that a Black blockchain startup is inferior than a white startup that may be doing the exact same thing?
I like when you said remapping the mind. There is a narrative that my elder talks about, and he talks about the making of a sheepdog. And he says that you take a dog when it is born as a puppy, and you make it suckle at the breast of the sheep, and it begins to believe that it is a sheep, and it will use all of its dog instincts to protect the safety and sanctity of the sheep. So much so that once it is an adult, it will guard against anything that will come into the space of the sheep because it believes that that thing is its enemy. You can take another dog and put close by, and it will attack and kill that entity because it is threatening the safety of the sheep. You can take its own biological mother and put in the space with it, and it will attack and ravage and attempt to kill her because she is a threat to the safety of who the dog thinks it is. And then
so literally the only thing that I remember from my Psych 101.
There you
the
go.
Conditioning.
The conditioning.
Dog.
There
That's
it
the only
is.
thing I remember. I don't remember anything else.
That's
I
it.
did take one class. Keep going.
And the worst part of it is that if you put a mirror in front of this dog, it will attack its own image in the mirror because it believes that its enemy is its own image. And so that is the making of a sheepdog. And so what we have here is what you mentioned classically is this idea of conditioning. That is a presented type of a mindset that is developed over time that creates what you talked about, a schema or mapping, where one begins to see the thing outside of itself as being greater than itself because it has been perpetually fed by the thing that's alien to it. So when you begin to examine how have we sustained ourselves, we've been conditioned to see that the European reality is the only one that we need to attend to. Is what I call learned significance. We learned to think that, assume significance. We assume that everything European is great, and learning indifference will become indifferent to anything about ourselves. And so we begin to think about how we have been fed, sustained ourselves. And so we were fed on plantations, we were protected. And so the way that you season individuals, by the way, for the enslavement experience is that you begin to take the child away from its mother when it is born. And so the mother may have gone to Jamaica, but the child is taken to Brazil, or another one may be taken to the United States. And so a child doesn't even grow up knowing who it is. And so it begins to believe that the oppressor is its own parent. And so it begins to believe that the oppressor also works in its best interest. And so then you have people that have difficult time seeing themselves ever work in their own interest because all they've ever seen was somebody that looked unlike them in control. So then we believe then that the white man's ice is colder, that the white man's sugar is sweeter, that the white man's water is wetter, right? And so we begin to believe this because we've never seen ourselves in control. Let me tell you about conditioning within myself and talk about blockchain and on-ramping. The first time I saw money from Jamaica with Marcus Garvey on it, my initial thought was the money wasn't real. Now think about that. Here I am in my 20s. Why did I, even though I'm a psychologist and I've had the notion of conditioning, think that the money wasn't real? Because it had a black image on it. So it was like monopoly money to me because I had been conditioned through iconography and imagery to see that value and worth can only come through European. So the only money I've seen has had Jefferson and Washington and Lincoln and Benjamin Franklin. So that becomes money because it has value. And nothing like me has ever looked like that. So now you ask me to invest in something like blockchain concept. Well, I already know that people are trying to get over on it and they look like me. That's psychological. The only thing that has value and worth are things that are European. That's psychological. And the only way that you can make money is with European. So we talk about, well, I want to, it's not just black. It has to be just as you said, the best person for the job. Well, if the best person is black, what do? You have to always adjust the schema because you don't want to appear to be partial to your own kind. I suffered sometimes in academia when I had black teachers and I was in a majority setting because that teacher had to show that she was fair to all students and that she would get on black and white students alike, which means she had to get on me more to demonstrate her fairness. Now think about the paradox in that. The teacher had to be unfair to me to demonstrate the fairness of the people. So I'm suffering in that academic environment for her to demonstrate her fairness. So I'm the sacrificial lamb, so to speak, to show that. And so the point is that we recognize that there's been conditioning that's taken place. And you asked the question, how do we begin to break that conditioning? We have to begin to create the scenarios where there are dollars with Marcus Garvey on it, for example. We have to begin to believe in ourselves, in our smaller circles, those who are challenging the psychological chains of slavery, that, as according to Dr. Naeem Akbar, and that we are challenging that, and we're seeing that, yes, we are capable of doing the great and wonderful things. More importantly, we back to the things that we have all done in this space. And I'll give you several examples that make sense. The reason that I'm in a climate control space right now is because of the genius of a black man. The reason that we have the pen that we write with is for the genius of a black man and woman, right? The idea of the traffic light. And the question becomes, which one of these enterprises, from the pen, the lawnmower, the gas mask, the technology in the cell phone, the microphone that's been used right now was created by a black man, a technology in it, which the alarm system in this building was influenced by a black woman, Gladys West, and the GPS. Which one of these inventions, creations that we are benefiting from right now, the light that's shining here, the electricity, Lewis Latimer, which one can we say that we benefit from economically as a group of people? And there is not a single one. But we have created all of these things that's made everybody's life better. Well, if that's the case, then why can we not do the same thing for ourselves? And that's where blockchain comes in to say, look, we've been doing this. We have a history. That's what you do. You show your portfolio. Here's the track record. It's not new. Here's a track record of our greatness, that we are the drivers of the economy of the world. If you don't believe me, I'm going off again, Deidre, that the crown jewel of in England is made of gold. Where did the gold come from? The gold did not come from Europe. The jewels on the crown came from India and Africa. The gold came from Africa. The economy in this country was based on resources that came from the soils of Africa. As a matter of fact, the economy in this country was impacted by the knowledge base of Gambians who came over to South Carolina, and what they call South Carolina gold was growing rice. And back to that example again, growing the rice, which saved Carolina, which saved, more importantly, the entire United States, because it was going under because it had no economy. So the genius of a population has a portfolio of greatness that's impacted the forward flow of humanity economically, from the UK to the United States to Australia, all over where you find Europeans, they have been pariahs and parasites onto the genius of African people. So if that is the case, then how much further can we go by simply believing in one another, on-ramping to a blockchain construct to begin to benefit ourselves and expand not only the reach and grasp and breadth and depth of the population, but also begin to expand the economic development of ourselves, so that we are the owners of ourselves in reality, and not simply being lent out as labor for somebody else's wealth and well-being.
Yeah, I think we have to start very young as well, almost preschool, because there's a little, in light of Chadwick Boseman's recent passing, people are resharing some old videos that were popular during when Black Panther launched, and it was a little boy who is crying and his mother's filming him, and he's saying, she's like, "Why are you crying?" And he says, "Well, I'm not Black." And she says, "What are you talking about?" And he said, "Well, I want to be Black Panther and I'm not Black." And she goes, "Wait a minute, I think she was half Filipino and Mexican. And she's like, "And Dad's Black." And he said, "Well, that means I'm white." And so she keeps filming because it's humorous. But this, 4-year-old child had absorbed in his mind that he was white already. And that, it kind of reversed the paradigm, because he was upset that he wasn't Black. And that's kind of the reason why people were sharing it. But these types of notions of this tribalism or this self-hate or something like that is usually reversed. It's usually a scenario that a child of that age has absorbed, that they're not white, or they're not lighter, or they're not of a privileged class, even dealing within the Black diaspora. So how do we get if you take a scenario such as maybe Sudan, how do we get people who identify differently to recognize their Blackness? And the reason why I kind of say Sudan, in certain places like Somalia, they suffer from this Arabism. Both groups are Black, but they're fighting one wants to identify with being more Saudi and these type of cultural and very anti-African, anti-self. And another group is trying to reclaim their Africanity, their language or whatever, but they still recognize that they're Muslim at the same time. And they can't seem to get together to work together. And that's just a small microcosm of what exists throughout the African continent, what exists throughout the Caribbean. You know, I'm from Trinidad. I'm from not Jamaican. I'm Jamaican. I'm not from Barbados. I'm Haitian. I don't. Everybody doesn't speak English. How do we kind of break down these barriers that everybody can kind of work together, still representing their respective cultural and ethnic identities, but then we can actually move forward?
You know, a good example of how that has been broken down is looking at the Hutus and the Tutsis, right? You talk about Kagame coming in and creating this economy in a space where people had brutally attacked one another based on European ideology or Western ideology or alien ideology. And so what we recognize is that there is this alien ideology that comes into a space that permeates the mind. And so we challenge the mindset of the ideology. Is it true that to be Islamic is better than to be traditional? Is it true being Christian, or is it true being from Trinidad, right? What is our common lineage? And so having spent some time in Barbados and other spaces, recognizing that some people identify with the fact that we are African people. So when you begin to break that down and say that we come from one space and that these were holding stations, it begins to change things. I was in Barbados and there was this seasoning that had this black face on it. It looks like old Blackie or Darky image that was used here in the United States. And so when I showed it to the person that had taken me there, we worked in academia together. He worked we worked in Florida together. And so when I showed him the image, he said, "Oh, that's what it is." I said, no, look at this closely. And it wasn't until I began to inform him of the symbolism and iconography that was being depicted here, which symbolizes this idea of the inferiority of blackness at some level, he began to see, so you know what, I've seen this all my life. I never thought about that. The point is that we have to present moments where people can begin to think about and ask the question, am I better because I'm from the North in the United States, or if I'm from the South? Am I better because I am Mandinka, Wolof, Sadea? Am I better because I'm Hausa, Yoruba? Am I better because I am Fanti, Twi, Guy in Ghana, right? So we get caught into these conversations that are based on European estrangement, because the reason why we have the continent bifurcated in the first place is because of the economic development, dealing with the Council of Berlin. So we have to recognize that we perpetuate their economic growth and development as long as we stay bound by their divisions that they created within us. And so we challenge those divisions and say that, no, I have a different way of life, but my different way of life, that doesn't make me better. And so you see communities like in the Gambia, for example, people have some tribalism conversations, but it's not something that they can't come together and to experience what is Conquerant and so forth. So they can come together and share in the experience together. And we can do the same thing here, but we also divided in this space. We get divided between Bloods and Crips. We get divided between a whole host of things, but at the same time, every time we divide, who benefits economically?
Yeah, I think that we have to even go back historically to you know, it's in my bio on the Hova platform, but you know, I have at least 3 different identities, at least 3 different things that I consider I do very well, and Bitcoin and blockchain is one of them. But the long before 2009, you know, since I was 8 years old, I was always writing about and reading about Kemet and Kush, more Kemet than Kush. I'm still a novice, I think, in terms of nubiology. But one of the things I shared with someone recently, and we just finished a camp experience. Kemet Nubia camp was geared towards children. It was a virtual camp that we debuted this summer. 4 of us in total that are working on this project. And I said, one of the observations I've noticed in many years that I've looked over Kemet, it was not a single ethnic group. It's not a single religion. They were related deities, but you know, if you had the Amunis of the 18th dynasty, they were not the Ramesses of the 19th dynasty. So you can almost see those as different religions. And I said, I don't recall in all the documents that I've read that there was ever a war declared over ethnicity or religion. There was war declared over property and land and taking away and resources and drought and famine. So all these property entities that are tied into the blockchain, but it wasn't a war based on, well, I don't like you because you're a Syrian. Even with people of Kemet being boastful, and they were boastful about themselves. They talked highly about themselves and their land, Kemet, and all that kind of stuff. But you didn't have, I'm fighting the Taseti, the Nubians, or the Ta-Nehisi because I just don't like the way they look, or I don't like that with the training. It was a border issue. If they were fighting the Aha or the Asiatics, it was a border. They keep running up in this country, or we keep running over their country. And we lost the power and the control. It was always that. So I think if we look very much at some of the old, pre-Greek type things, and not to say it was a utopia, it wasn't, it had the same rape, murder, and everything as anything else, but you don't have the dispute that I've never read the dispute based on, we just don't like the way they look or the way they are. It was always a property resource thing, which hopefully we're hoping that blockchain can kind of resolve the clarity of who possesses what and who is exchanging what in terms of property, either real physical property or digital property. So with that, have you ever come across any modern day people throughout the diaspora that you think that are getting it right, despite their diversity, that we can model and use in terms of the blockchain sector?
I like the way that you talked about the Taseti, Tamari, Taiwani, right? The Punt, Kush civilizations, right? And how people are able to have discussions and debates around issues of property and acquisition, but not necessarily around who's better. And that comes from a position of a feeling of inferiority. And so we have to recognize that in large part, the reason why we have self-hatred imposed upon us is because people who dislike themselves begin to make other people do what they do, all right? So people think that you think the way they think. Let me break it down that way. And so what we have is that we've bought into the ideology of white supremacy. And the question that you asked was, had there been some group or groups of people that are breaking through? I want to submit to you that blockchain becomes one of the more promising aspects of breaking that particular chain of what is better, who's better, because it trades and swaps on a variety of levels. It actually trades around individual assets. So we talk about the data set, what is the asset that you present that benefits me in my space that then can be sold, and then we can begin to trade around this asset. And so we're talking about so-called asset management, but asset building. And that's different from a deficit model thinking that you think you are better than me because, no, we're talking about how can we build from assets. So I mentioned to you Kagame, right, the idea of Uganda. The difference is that actually breaking those particular chains of psychological slavery to create asset building. So what are we going to do? You have to have some penultimate or superordinate goals. Superordinate goal is one in which everybody agrees that it is one that we're working on right now for the moment. So if we can say that superordinate goal is for us to generate economic wealth in this space for our community. And so we're going to use blockchain to generate the land wealth, the resource wealth. We're going to use blockchain concepts to begin to benefit economically from, let's say, the greatest exporter of America, rap music. And so we're going to find ways to exchange around the resources and the assets of that, be it sound, lyrics, rhythm tracks called beats, technology, mastering the various forms of editing. We're trading around that to build something bigger, and that is to build a greater empire where we're controlling the wealth to then influence change at the ground level. What we have to always do is to make sure that whatever we're doing conceptually has a grounding that is practical for our people. That is the best way to begin to eradicate that. And that's what has happened in various countries that have been able to utilize this breaking down of the barriers, is that this answers the question of anguish, of pain, of hatred. If you also look at Egypt or Kemet, we talk about the 42 negative admonitions or we talk about the Hosea, the various books that were written, the question becomes, how can my living begin to resolve issues so that we all are made better because of our existence, right? That is that the 42 negative admonitions talk about, I have not hurt, I have not defrauded, I have not harmed anyone else, right? Idea is, how does my living make your existence better? And how does it make it better for all of us? That's where blockchain is going to be critical, because the question is going to be answered in, by doing these things, we will all be elevated and become owners, and not simply be owned by someone else. And so we can use the ancient civilizations, and we can use Kagame, and we can use other spaces that are doing this very thing to say, we will uplift our community because my existence makes us better.
So how do we assess? Because, you know, even dealing with, if we were just dealing with Black people, how do we assess the most progressive of our community, you know, on face value? Because you could just do a bad deal with someone you just didn't know was suffering from pests in the beginning. And so you have one conception of what you want to do. And this person says, yeah, I want on it. And then you start, and all of a sudden it crumbles apart. And Europeans weren't even a factor, even though the mindset, you know, probably the conditioning was already there, so to speak. So how do we kind of assess so that we can link across borders and virtually and progress with the right types of people, the right mindset rather?
So the question becomes, is what doing best or good for African people? That's Dr. Merabani's famous question. Is what I'm doing good for African people? And so we have to ask that critical question. Now, we have people among us who look like us, but are not of our best interest. They are sick. We are all experiencing some level of sickness that we're working to get well from. And so sometimes in displaying their illness in our faces, in our spaces, is a moment for them to heal them that through getting a new life lesson. And we will have these encounters. It's not like it's going to be, as you said earlier, it's going to just be a smooth path to create this decision. We can smooth the path out by transforming our thinking. Dr. Fukuyama gives us a classic example about how to pre-pave the way. Ancient Kemet was a very similar construct of how to pre-pave the way logic and spirit, such that we will encounter things that we can make them smoother along the way. And through thinking and experiencing and being better examples and each and every day. So the fundamental question becomes, am I a human being what? I'm being the best version of myself today, and I'm becoming better at it each and every day. So I'm also becoming. That becomes an example of how others can also live. So we do not then stop because we will come and we'll betray our trust. And sometimes we betray our, today I'll do A and C, we don't do A, B, or C. So, but the reality is that we can realign ourselves and to move better, to become a better version of ourselves. And so, Sister Deidre, my question always on this very day has been from the time I got up is that, what about me will make this process of our people better? And how will my interaction with Deidre McIntyre make her a better person? How will she make me better? Right? It's not about what is it about me that's great and wonderful that people need to hear. The question becomes, what is about the experience that will make me better? Because I want to be better every single day. And I think that's the challenge that we have to have. And sometimes the challenges that we encounter, where we betrayed, are designed to make us better. You don't walk into a gymnasium. You don't walk into a space with weights and just all of a sudden these muscles on you and you don't swole. You have to engage in resistance. The resistance is the thing that breaks down the muscle, but if we keep working it out, working through it, we become stronger because of it. And our strength is when we begin to elevate and become better. So sometimes we will have moments of resistance, moments of betrayal, moments of pain. That's part of being a psychologist. We talk about that, but I don't get stuck on the problems. I get stuck on the possibilities. responsibility is the what next.